come to order. Today's agenda includes one judicial nominee, one U.S. Attorney nominee, a U.S. Marshal nominee, whom we intend to vote on today. The agenda also includes 3 nominees listed for the first time and will be held over at the request of the minority. Jeremy Daniel, nominated to the Northern District of Illinois, Brenda Herson, nominated to the District of Maryland, and Darrell Papillon, nominated to the Eastern District of Louisiana. 2 bills are listed on the agenda for the first time and will be held over. S-412, the SHIELD Act, sponsored by Senators Klobuchar and Cornyn. S-1170, the Project Safe Childhood Act, sponsored by Senators Cornyn, Klobuchar, Grassley, Blumenthal, Blackburn, Graham, Ossoff, Tillis, and Welsh. We also have 4 other judicial nominees who will be held over again. I'd like to discuss the legislation that is on today's agenda. This February, Democrats and Republicans came together for a hearing that highlighted the grave threats and dangers our children face in the online world. There was a real sense of bipartisan agreement and purpose at the end of that hearing. I remember it well. I committed at that hearing that I would move legislation in our committee's jurisdiction to address the problem, and for several months I have worked to get to this point. First on our agenda today is the Earn It Act, sponsored by Senator Graham, Senator Blumenthal, and co-sponsored by many members of this committee. The Earn It Act would create a National Commission on Online Child Sexual Exploitation Prevention and make it clear that tech companies are not shielded from liability under child pornography laws. The Earn It Act has been reported out of this committee unanimously each of the last 2 Congresses. I hope we do so again today. Next on the agenda is my Stop CSAM Act. I circulated a discussion draft of this bill the day of our February hearing, and since that time, my staff has been working with every office on this committee, many of them multiple times, to solicit members' input. Yesterday, I circulated a manager's amendment so that everyone could see the changes we've made to the bill to address the concerns that we've heard. The Stop CSAM Act has 5 main components. I'll walk through them briefly. First, the Act requires reporting of child sexual abuse by organizations that provide services to children. You remember back in 2017? I certainly do. News broke of the horrific scandal where hundreds of female gymnasts were sexually assaulted by Larry Nassar. Congress acted quickly for a change on a bipartisan basis to expand the federal child abuse reporting statute to apply to youth and amateur sports organizations. Despite this swift action, there's a gap in the law that is very obvious. Organizations that provide services to children outside of athletics are not covered by these same federal reporting laws, and state laws do not cover the gaps. In other words, there is a mandatory reporting for Little League, but not for Cub Scouts. Does that make sense? Stop CSAM would require entities that receive $10,000 or more in discretionary federal grant dollars to provide services to children to report child sex abuse when they become aware of it, to just report it. It also creates an incentive through supplemental grants to Internet Crimes Against Children task forces for states to enact laws requiring reporting of sexual abuse by organizations that care for children. Now, I made a number of changes to this reporting provision to accommodate concerns expressed by my Republican colleagues about potential unintended adverse impact on religious liberty. I know that's an important issue for Senator Lee and others, of requiring reported physical or psychological abuse. The current bill requires reporting of child sexual abuse or exploitation only, not any other form of child abuse. Second, the Stop CSAM Act creates a report and remove program that empowers survivors to compel online providers to take down CSAM and related imagery. I recently spoke on the Senate floor about a young woman named Charlotte. As a teenager, she shared sexual images of herself with someone she thought was her boyfriend. He posted them online, and they followed her for the rest of her life. They keep reappearing on the internet. She attempted suicide 3 different times. Charlotte and victims like her need an easy-to-use mechanism to notify providers when they're hosting CSAM and to seek enforcement if the content is not removed in a timely manner. That's what the bill provides. The third part strengthens the cyber tip line. The cyber tip line is a system through which online providers send reports about CSAM to National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who then forward them to law enforcement. I want to highlight one change in particular. Just this week, NCMEC, known as MICNIC, published its annual report on cyber tips it received in the year 2022. In its report, it discussed the difference between actionable and informational reports. An actionable report is one where tech company provides sufficient information for law enforcement to conduct an investigation. An informational report, in contrast, is one where there's insufficient information for any law enforcement action. Shockingly, half of the cyber tips in 2022 were informational. Even worse, NCMEC identified 36 companies where 90% of the cyber tips lacked actionable information, including Amazon Photos, a massive corporation with the resources to do better. Stop CSAM addresses this by requiring cyber tips to include basic subscriber information and any other publicly available information, so NCMEC will receive far more actionable reports. Filing a report with no information does no really good for the children who are potentially exploited. Fourth, the Stop CSAM Act establishes a civil cause of action. Many members expressed their interest in seeing that happen. A civil cause of action for victims of child sexual exploitation against online providers and app stores that intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly promote or facilitate exploitation. This section expands an existing federal civil cause of action for victims of child sexual abuse. Just last Congress, we recognized the importance of civil remedies when we eliminated the statute of limitation for civil claims under this statute. It's time to take action again to let victims of CSAM have their day in court. The manager's amendment makes some changes to civil liability provision in response to feedback from the members. We've eliminated negligence as a basis of liability. We've also added language to specify the evidence needed to establish that a provider was intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly hosting or storing CSAM. We've added an affirmative defense that applies when providers provide CSAM within 3 days of learning it's on their platform, or when providers are unable to remove the content. And we added language taken from the EARN Act to specify that encryption cannot be the sole basis for liability. The last main component of the Stop CSAM Act is the creation of a criminal penalty for the worst of the worst providers that promote or facilitate online child sexual exploitation. At the February hearing, I remember it well, we heard about the horrifying growth in online child sexual exploitation. For example, NCMEC described a rapidly emerging form of online crime called financial sextortion, where offenders trick minors into sending sexual imagery and then threaten to distribute the images unless the minor sends money. In the first month of 2023 alone, NCMEC received more than 1,000 reports related to financial sextortion. A majority of these reported incidents occurred on just 4 different platforms. Platforms that promote or facilitate this conduct can be prosecuted under the Stop CSAM Act, which I've introduced. This act is supported by significant stakeholders, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the National District Attorneys Association, the National Fraternal Order of Police, the Major Cities Chiefs Association, National Children's Alliance, Child USA, Raven Child Rescue Coalition, and on and on. It's time for this committee to get serious. Our emotions are raised by the hearings that we've held and the victims that come before us. It's heartbreaking to think of some of the things that we've heard in this committee. And there's a lot of resolve and determination after those appearances. The question is, do we have resolve and determination to actually pass a law? When we had a hearing involving the latest Supreme Court justice, questions about CSAM came up over and over again. I believe that that was a call to arms for us to try to move on a bipartisan basis to actually do something. It's time for this committee to get serious about legislating in this area. I know it's a difficult topic. I know it's controversial, but think of those victims and the fact that they're depending on us to get this started. I look forward to working with all of you, and we will continue to have an open access for both sides of the aisle. When we finish the Stop CSAM Act, we'll move on to other bills on the agenda, which I'll discuss at a later time. With that, I recognize Ranking Member Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The hearing you referenced was very compelling, and I want to thank all the members who found solutions for different problems we've heard about. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I think some of our folks have problems with the approach, but, is worthy of our continued discussion and trying to find common ground here. I guess the bottom line is that we've heard that social media outlets can do a lot of good for the world, and it can destroy lives, and we're sort of trying our best to figure out how to approach this. From a consumer's point of view, you're just completely screwed. You can't sue these people. You can go to the provider and say, my child is being bullied, my child is losing their mind. Terms of use service that we have with you say that you don't allow bullying. They go back 3 times, the company blows them off, the child kills themselves, and they can't sue because of Section 230. Is that the America we want? Section 230 had a reason to exist, to give these platforms a chance to get up and running. They're up and running. They're the largest companies in the world. They're making hundreds of billions of dollars, and part of their business model is destroying people's lives. And they're going to beat us. We're going to pass the Earn It Act today, but it'll go nowhere. We're going to pass Senator Blackburn's bill, but they'll beat us eventually. They got a ton of money, and every time you try to do something, there's some group saying, you're destroying speech, and the money talks. So I'm working with Senator Warren, Mr. Chairman, to try to jump over all the legislative problems we have and create a commission of people smarter than us, which should be easy to do, and give them some power to go after these folks. You have to have a license to drive a car. You have to have a license to sell real estate, to practice law, to sell insurance, to sell stock. But the largest companies in the world are not licensed. There is no regulatory agency with any meaningful power to hold them to account. You can't sue them in court. And we're trying to pass laws, but they seem to go nowhere. And I'll tell you what will happen. We'll pass many of the things we're talking about in this committee, but it will die. They'll just beat us in the legislative process. So I'm urging this committee to think big and to create some power out there in a regulatory environment to protect consumers. Consumers have 3 ways really to be protected. If you're wrong, you can go to court. Well, you can't do that here. There's a bunch of laws on the books protecting you from the products being offered to you. There are none on the books, and I don't see any anytime soon. Or there's some group of people with authority that can regulate the people offering products to you and your family that are doing harm, that can stop it. They don't exist. We're 0 for 3. So what I'm going to be doing is working with every member of this committee to pass laws, but also I'm going to try to create infrastructure that would allow some consumer protection agency in the digital space to go after these people when they wrong the public. They should have a license to operate. That license should be granted based on certain things you have to do to keep your license. There should be some people looking over their shoulders that can take that license away when you don't do your job. That's where I'm headed. I welcome you to join me. I will join in every effort, Mr. Chairman, to pass legislation, but I am not optimistic. Finally, if this doesn't work, I'm going to offer legislation to repeal Section 230, 2 years from whatever date the bill is enacted, and let the trial lawyers fix this problem. We can't do this anymore. If we can't pass statutory schemes to protect the consumer, if we can't create an agency to protect the consumer, then we need courtrooms opened up to people who have been wronged, to the social media companies. I'm glad to work with you. I want to work with you, but you're eventually going to lose. And if I were you, I'd sit down with a bunch of us and try to figure a way to regulate your business so you can thrive and survive and protect the consumers. Because if you don't, we're going to unleash the courtrooms of America against your business model.
I just want to respond, Senator Graham, that I agree with virtually everything you've said, and I honestly believe I might question 2 years more of this exploitation, but I certainly believe it's time for the social media companies to face the reality. We can have these hearings after hearings after hearings. We can hear all the victims and all the surviving parents tell these terrible stories. We can imagine them among our own children and grandchildren. And then if we step back and say, this is just too big and complicated, and we're against too big a situation here, we can't change it. Shame on us. We asked to serve in the United States Senate, made great sacrifice to come here. Many of us asked to be part of this committee so we could make some differences. And this is our opportunity to do it. We have to give and take, obviously, on a closely divided committee. But I hope we all start with the same premise. We have a job to do, and it's to safeguard these children and families across America who are innocent victims of exploitation. Shame on us if we don't. Next is Molly Selfin, nominated to the Court of Federal Claims, graduate of Yale and Harvard, background in patent and trademark law. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Ms. Selfin's nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Harona. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton.
If it's
No
11.
by proxy.
This is just in case
Mr.
it comes
Kennedy.
out as,
Aye by
it,
proxy.
it won't come out 11:10 just
Mr.
because of,
Tillis.
for instance, precedent.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 14, the nays are 7.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Eric Olshan, nominated to be U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Harona. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 13, the nays are 8.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Finally, we have Craig Anderson, nominated to be U.S. Marshal for the District of Montana. I understand we can have a voice vote, but does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Craig J. Anderson, U.S. Marshal for the District of Montana, all of those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The majority of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. Senator Graham, are there any Republicans wishing to be shown as no on that
Anybody
nomination?
want to be no? Senator Cruz would like to be recorded as no.
Clerk will reflect that request in the record. The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next, we consider S 1207, the Earn It Act of 2023. It's been reintroduced by Senators Graham and Blumenthal, many sponsors on the committee, creating a national commission on online child sexual exploitation prevention, a 19-member panel tasked with developing best practices for the tech companies to prevent child exploitation on their platforms. It creates targeted exceptions to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, making clear that the law does not shield tech companies from federal and state civil liability and state criminal liability under existing child pornography laws. I want to thank Senator Graham and Blumenthal for their good work on this bill and determination to pass it. I'm pleased to support it again as I did in the previous Congress. I now turn to the sponsors. First, Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had this debate before, and Senator Lee, we certainly will always be working with you to make sure we do this in an acceptable manner. What are we trying to do? We're trying to basically penetrate Section 230. We're trying to make them earn the liability protection. So Senator Blumenthal and I came up with the idea that, you know, to get this liability protection when it comes to sexual exploitation of children, you should at least earn it. And we're creating a commission to come up with the best business practices to encourage people to do what they can within reason to protect children from sexual exploitation. And if you don't follow those best business practices, you lose protection under the law. You literally have to earn it. I think it's a pretty clever approach to change the social media behavior by making them earn something that most people don't have in America, which is absolute immunity from lawsuit. When you think about it, the average American in business can be sued if they make a mistake, they intentionally cause somebody pain and suffering, except these folks. Of all the people in America in 2023, you would want to make immune from lawsuits, we picked the social media companies. We picked the people who are screwing you over every day, that could give a damn about what your kids see, that are not lifting a finger when they have complaints. You're ruining my child's life. You promise us in your terms of use that you will protect the people who use these sites from bullying. When somebody goes and begs you, intervene because you're destroying my kid's life, I'm doing the best I can as a parent, I need your help, they blow you off. And now, you're trying to get some justice, Section 230 stops the lawsuit. So when it comes to sexual exploitation of children, there are 32 million reports of suspected child sexual exploitation, 49.4 million images, and 37.7 million videos. The reason we don't show these in the committee, it would make you sick. Now there's a game where you trick a kid into sending an image of themselves, sexually compromised or a nude image, and you hold it over them to extort them. Shouldn't we sue those people? They couldn't exist without the social media companies giving them a platform. So what we're trying to do is create a commission of really smart people to come up with business practices that would protect our children and our families better. And if you don't follow those business practices, you could be sued. Everybody voted for it last time. I'm sure everybody's going to vote for it this time, and I'm sure it will eventually go nowhere.
I hope you're wrong, Senator. Senator Blumenthal?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with everything that my partner in this effort has said, and I couldn't say it better, except that it will go nowhere.
Well, I hope you're right.
This bill is the result of literally years of work. Many of you, like Senator Lee, have cooperated and worked with us. I also want to thank the chairman for his enormously constructive work, and I strongly support the Stop CSAM Act, and your and Senator Graham's leadership has been instrumental in getting us this far, and in the past, passing this bill out of committee unanimously, and I hope it will be again. I also want to thank Senator Hawley for his work. We held a hearing not long ago on Section 230. I would agree with Senator Graham that Section 230 has outlived its usefulness. And this bill essentially provides a narrow, targeted carve-out from Section 230. It is a step. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I hope it will break the barrier that we have begun doing against holding big tech accountable. The numbers that you've cited, Mr. Chairman, Those 32 million reports from NCMEC are an increase from 29.3 million last year. The number of enticements online is up by 82%, according to NCMEC. And I just really want to thank the families that have come forward to Senator Blackburn and me and Senator Graham to tell their stories. And some of these young people have written to us themselves. 18-year-old Anastasia wrote to me about the trauma of her private images as a young teen being shared online. These are images, sexual, explicit images. As Senator Graham said, we wouldn't allow them to be shown in this room. And she wrote to me, quote, "Having my abuse forever immortalized on the internet is something I will never be able to escape." These images that teens may unwisely and imprudently share live forever. And we are allowing these teens to continue to be exploited, victims of sextortion, and other kinds of abuses. So this narrow carve-out to Section 230 essentially provides for a standard. We will shortly have a manager's amendment that will set a floor of recklessness. It protects the rights of big tech, but finally, it will give a right to be heard in court a day before a judge or a jury to those teens who want to stop this kind of exploitation. It will give them rights that they would enjoy right now under the Constitution, but for this immunity under Section 230, designed for a time when the internet companies were nascent, struggling, small enterprises. No longer. They should be held accountable. And I'll just finish on this note. There's no question, Senator Graham is right, that we are in for a fight. No one should underestimate the armies of lawyers and lobbyists that big tech will throw at us. No one should underestimate the myths and misconceptions that they will try to foist on the United States Congress. No one should underestimate the amounts of money they'll spend on campaign contributions. But we need to hold them accountable, and so long as they say, not our problem, we have immunity, we need to take action, and that's what we're doing with the Earn It Act. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Before I open the floor to any other comments, Senator Graham would like to make a motion.
Yes, we have a manager's amendment. I'd like to call up 0LL23438.
Questions on the adoption of the manager's amendment? All those in favor say aye. Opposed,
Aye.
no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The manager's amendment's adopted. Does any other senator seek recognition? Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a couple of things to say on this, and I do agree with Senator Blumenthal, and I do hope that Senator Graham is wrong in that this goes nowhere. The reason is this. We have heard from countless parents and teens who have shared their story, and the fact that these platforms hide behind Section 230 when they have CSAM and then send parents who are reporting to them bullying, sexually explicit material, things that are happening to their kids, and they send something back months later that says, this does not violate our community standards. This has got to stop. We have a mental health crisis with our teenagers in this country. Now, my End Child Exploitation Act is folded in to the Earn It Act. The reason this is important is because these platforms have been holding material for only 90 days. And law enforcement says we cannot keep up with the barrage of reports that we're getting about this online sexual exploitation of children. So this will require these platforms to keep this for a year so that the evidence is held and so that law enforcement has the time to investigate these crimes and carry out these prosecutions. So this is the time we need to move forward with this. We need to push this through not only the Senate, but get it to the president's desk, get it through the House, because parents are depending on us. You know, it's so interesting with the Kids Online Safety Act that Senator Blumenthal and I have reintroduced, and so many of you are there as co-sponsors. The parents had hoped that we would have that passed by the time kids got out for school this summer. And of course, we're not going to hit that deadline. And they know this is a heavy lift because they know how social media is fighting it. They hope that we will have it done by the time kids go back to school, because these kids are being literally cyberbullied to death. Think about that. They are being cyberbullied to death. They are being sexually extorted to the point of suicide. We have girls that are meeting drug dealers, sex traffickers online. And we have kids that are falling into severe depression. We would never in a million years allow children to be exposed in the physical world to what they are being exposed to online. And it is time that these social media platforms be held to account.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else seek recognition? Senator Coons? I'm sorry, Senator Lee was first, and then Senator Coons. And Senator Padilla, you're on the list.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful that the sponsors of the bill and Senators Blumenthal and Graham have been willing to work with me on some of my concerns. We've seen some moves in a nod in the right direction with the amendment that you've made, acknowledging the need for a reckless standard. And that is a step in the right direction. I don't think it goes as far as we need it to go. And I'm happy to let this go by voice today. I would like to fix that issue before this gets to the floor. My concern is that unless we have a greater definition than the amendment gives us as to what recklessness is, when we outsource it to states, it could come to mean something very different than recklessness. The reason this matters has to do with the fact that with encryption, everything we do online relies on encryption. Everything from protecting America's national security secrets to something as pedestrian as a purchase you make on Amazon or any other online vendor relies on encryption. We got to be careful that we not accidentally destroy encryption. There are ways to do that. We're not there yet, but I would like to get there because we need the protections for children that are in this law. So I look forward to working with you on that. Been frustrated that we haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet, but we'll get there. Thank you.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank Senators Blumenthal and Graham for their continued efforts to address the spread of child sexual abuse material on the internet. We should be investing more in protecting our children, helping them recover from unspeakable traumas that have been referenced today, and holding perpetrators and enablers of their abuse accountable. And as part of that effort, I agree, technology companies can and should be doing more to keep our children safe online. And I certainly want to see us pass legislation that keeps our children safe. I am sensitive to some of the concerns that human rights organizations have consistently expressed about the legislation. They warn that the bill could result in the censorship of lawful speech and activity in a manner that will disproportionately burden diverse communities, particularly the LGBTQ community. Mr. Chairman, I ask consent to enter into the record a coalition letter sent and signed by 133 human rights organizations, including the Human Rights Campaign, Amnesty International, the American Civil Liberties Union, GLAAD, and the Center for Democracy and Technology, which details these issues.
Without objection.
The concern has only become more pressing, in my opinion, as Republican state legislatures across the country pass bills that broadly suppress LGBTQ rights and public discussion of LGBTQ issues. leaving the internet as one of the few remaining safe spaces available for discussion. I'm also concerned that as drafted, this bill may create new obstacles for vulnerable communities that rely on the security and privacy tools, particularly encryption, that this bill risks undermining. Just last week, this committee, you did a good job, Mr. Chairman, of laying out the context for how we got here today by outlining and reminding us of the various hearings that we've had to date on related topics. Just last week, this committee heard testimony about the landscape of access to healthcare in a post-Dobbs world. So let me be specific about this. One issue highlighted at the hearing last week was the growth of tracking and surveillance to prevent women from accessing reproductive care and to identify service providers who assist women in obtaining that care. Experts routinely recommend that people seeking abortions use encrypted services for their privacy, for their safety. And some women's healthcare providers say they rely heavily on encrypted forms of communication in order to protect their privacy and for their safety. So I think we need to be careful about the implications that this bill could have on the ability of women to access secure communication technologies and essential health services. So I want to reiterate my appreciation for the work that the sponsors and their staff have done to protect children online. Trust me, as a father, my heart breaks at the trauma and re-traumatization that victims of sexual abuse experience when their images are uploaded and shared online. I think the amendment that's been circulated by the sponsors certainly improves the bill, and I look forward to working with my colleagues in this effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. I'm going to recognize Senator Coons next. And we may take a roll call or attempt to pass the matter before 10 o'clock because there are other committee hearings. And then we'll continue to keep the committee open if people have any further comments on the bill. But first, Senator Coons, then Senator Ossoff, Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. My thanks to Senators Blumenthal and Graham for their continued leadership in this important effort to try and do everything we can to fight this horrible national, global scourge of child sex abuse material online. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, we're not taking up your bill today. You've worked tirelessly in this space. I think part of the solution here, as your bill references, is greater platform transparency. Billions of interactions go through just a few online platforms. And I think we need to better understand what their algorithms do to have more scientific information about their impact on children and their impact on us as a society. We shouldn't let platforms grade their own homework. That's why I've worked hard on the Bipartisan Platform Accountability and Transparency Act. It enjoys the support of Senators Cornyn and Klobuchar, Cassidy and Romney, and I hope to offer it as an amendment when we next meet, hopefully to consider your legislation. I think it would be an important addition to legislation in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Booker and Senator Ossoff.
I think Senator Ossoff was first.
Senator Ossoff?
No, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to echo my gratitude and appreciation to Senators Blumenthal and Graham for your leadership as we work to protect children from abuse and exploitation online and to prevent the dissemination of this horrific material. And I also want to thank the committee staff and your staffs for the effort that's been made to continue refining the legislation through this manager's amendment. And I echo some of the concerns raised by Senator Lee that it is important that we not unintentionally, in the construction of this legislation, cause there to be significant damage to the basic architecture of cybersecurity, which does rely upon encryption technology. I know that's not the intent of the drafters. I think progress is being made in the right direction. I do want to flag that as a concern worthy of continued attention and refinement if the legislation is headed to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senators Booker and Welch will be recognized, and then we're going to vote.
Very quickly, I want to thank the bill sponsors, Graham, and Blumenthal for their work in addressing what is a global scourge, which is causing extraordinary damage in our nation and beyond with child sexual abuse material. I will go even further and underline the comments that Senator Graham said regarding Section 230 and how it has been a bar for holding accountability when people are doing things that we as a nation would find reprehensible, and allowing it to be a shield for these massive corporations to deflect responsibility from doing things we can do to stop certain activities that we deem illegal and reprehensible. I agree with that passion that Senator Graham expressed and want to continue to work with him. I want to say, though, I also agree with this balance that Senator Lee and Senator Padilla pointed out. I have a real concern about, in this bill about issues of cybersecurity and how we might empower the government to do things to target disadvantaged groups for more harassment and discrimination, groups that we know are ultimately vulnerable. That balance is really key for me, and I want to thank the bill's sponsors and the chairman for being willing to work with people like Senator Lee, myself, Padilla, and others to try to get this bill refined and better balanced before we take it to the floor.
Senator Welch?
I'm agreeing with many of my colleagues who've just spoken, but bottom line here, we have to protect privacy, but we have a duty to provide protection. And this bill is drafted with the goal of accomplishing that. I think Senator Lee's amendments would enhance that, but that'll be a work in progress as we proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the sponsors of this legislation for the extraordinary work. Thank you.
I want to thank all senators and remind them of statements made by Senators Graham and Blumenthal. This is a critically important first step, but it is a first step. There are other elements we ought to consider seriously based on the hearings and the evidence that have been brought to this committee. So if no other senator seeks recognition, the question is on the passage of S 1207, the Earn It Act of 2023. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, a majority of members present having voted in the affirmative. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor. Are there any members wishing to be recorded no? Senator Graham?
Mr. Chairman.
The bill will be favorably reported.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I just want to say the bill will be favorably reported to the floor. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you very much. Just before we adjourn, 1 week from today, Title 42 expires. And the Senate Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction over immigration matters, has been strangely silent. I've been trying to work with you, with Senator Padilla, with anybody who wants to talk about how to deal with our broken immigration system. But the fact is that what is now a flood of humanity coming across the border is going to turn into a tsunami next week. The Biden administration sent 1,500 active duty troops to the border, which have no authority to actually enforce immigration laws. All they can do is administrative tasks, change diapers, push paper, but under our posse comitatus laws, they can't enforce immigration laws. I led a CODEL that some members of the committee attended down in Mexico City, trying to figure out, is there some way we can address our broken system? The House, I know, has been struggling to come up with a border security bill, and I expect and hope they will send us something. I'm sure it's not something that would get 60 votes in the Senate, but it's a place to start. The Biden administration has known for at least 2 years now that this day would come, and they are wholly unprepared for this. Part of it is just the impression that the border is open. And then you have the Secretary of Homeland Security and the press secretary for the President of the United States say the border is secure. That's demonstrably false. You don't have a secure border when you have 5 million people showing up, basically then being escorted into the interior of the country where you have Democratic mayors like the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor of New York saying, we're being overwhelmed. Well, my state is on the front line of this tsunami of humanity, and my border communities are being overwhelmed. There's not enough resources to deal with this, and the system is clearly broken. I have zero confidence that the new procedures that the administration is putting in place, where asylum cases can be handled through the ports of entry and people can apply using an app on their phone, unless the Biden administration is actually going to follow through on expedited removals in place of Title 42, this is not going to work. And I don't know what it takes. I mean, Senator Graham and I have had this conversation. We have 108,000 Americans who are dead. Dead. Last year alone, because of drugs that come across the border. 71,000 of those from fentanyl alone. We know where it's coming from. We know how to stop it. But we're doing nothing. I don't know what it takes for people's sense of outrage to be manifested in some action. So this is the committee that has jurisdiction. I don't know why we are not addressing it. It's hard. You know it's hard. I know it's hard. I mean, we've been talking about this topic the whole time I've been here in Congress. But we have to do better. And the Biden administration is clearly unprepared to deal with this, and so somebody's got to do it. And this is going to get worse before it gets better. So I just think we need to try harder.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to say a few words about the same subject. I've talked to members on the Republican side of the aisle who've told me they are interested in discussing immigration reform. I want to be part of that conversation too. Some of them have said to me in private, we can't make a move until we see the House initiate action. I heard this last week that they're going to. We'll see if they do. And maybe that will result in the 60 votes that we need to pass anything in the United States Senate. But it is true, Title 42 is a moment. The fate of DACA is another moment that is bound to be facing us in the near future. And I want to be part of that solution. I was part of the bipartisan gang of 8 that crafted an immigration reform bill, which passed in the United States Senate, was never called by the Republican-controlled House for consideration. I think that should be the starting point of our new conversation. The bipartisan bill that we passed many years ago, modified to reflect the realities of today. But yes, I'll be a willing partner in that effort and hope that it's a bipartisan effort that has enough votes to see it enacted into law.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Coons.
If I could just briefly, Senator Cornyn, I appreciated the opportunity to join you in trips both to Mexico City to meet with President Lopez Obrador and his cabinet at length, and to the border from the both Texas and Arizona side, the U.S.-Mexico border. This is a very difficult situation. I choose to be optimistic about the recent agreements with Mexico, the creation of broader processing sites throughout Central and South America. I do think we may see a request for additional resources for the border, a point you made. We need to be surging more resources into making sure that we have the personnel and the processing capacity to deal with this. I talked to 2 of the House members who traveled with us to Mexico City who tell me they have finished work on their bill, and I'm very hopeful that it will come forward. This is a difficult issue. It divides us as a nation. It implicates some of our most foundational values, but I appreciate your invitations and the opportunity to work with you and to try and talk further about this. This coming few weeks will be very difficult.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say briefly, I appreciate all of my colleagues and certainly respect them, and I appreciate those who went to Mexico City to try to listen and learn to see, is there some answer here? But one of the things my friend Senator Coons said about perhaps a supplemental appropriation request or more resources, I, for one, am not going to support any additional money going to the Department of Homeland Security without some reforms. We just can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which is what the Biden administration seems to be doing. So I just wanted to lay down that marker and say, maybe this is the opportunity. Sometimes things have to get to be a complete crisis before it summons the will on the part of Congress to actually do something about it. I'm afraid that time is here. Thank you.
This is challenging. We know that we anticipate more people at the border. We're trying to have the resources to make sure it's an orderly process. Speaker McCarthy's proposal would result in every single Border Patrol agent being furloughed for a year. That is hardly realistic in light of what we're facing at the border if we want true security and safety. So I'm prepared to provide the resources and make sure that even though it's taken us 30 years, that we initiate in Congress the conversation which leads to immigration reform. I think that has to be part of it. Anyone else seeking recognition? If not, the Senate Judiciary Committee will stand adjourned.